Have you ever noticed how life can grow strangely quiet just before something important begins? Not loud, not dramatic, not obvious, just quiet in a way that unsettles you. The calls lessen. The room feels larger than it used to. Familiar people seem farther away, and even your own thoughts begin to sound different to you. This reflection grows from an original source listed in the description, and at its heart is a truth many people carry without naming. Sometimes the silence you fear is not emptiness at all. Sometimes it is preparation. Many of us have been taught to associate progress with movement, applause, visible signs, and quick confirmation. We think change should arrive with certainty. We think blessing should feel good the moment it appears. But one honest way to understand spiritual growth is this: before something deep is built in you, something shallow often has to be cleared away. Before clarity comes, noise is reduced. Before strength becomes visible, weakness is revealed. Before a new life begins to take shape, an old way of being may begin to feel unbearably small. That is why the quiet can feel so painful. It does not simply remove sound, it removes distraction. And distraction, for many people, has been a form of comfort. When the crowd is gone, when the routine breaks, when the usual validations stop arriving, you are left standing before a question that cannot be outsourced. Who am I when no one is clapping? Who am I when no one is reaching for me? Who am I when life is not feeding me constant proof that I matter? Those are not cruel questions. They are sacred ones. Because if your worth has been resting in attention, approval, usefulness, or being needed, silence will feel like loss. But if your worth is deeper than performance, silence becomes a doorway. It becomes the room where you begin to hear your own spirit again. Not the anxious voice that panics, not the wounded voice that repeats old rejections. Something deeper, something steadier, a voice within that says, very softly, you are still here. You are still worthy. You were not created for noise alone. There are seasons when life seems to pull you back from the crowd, and your first instinct may be to think something has gone wrong. Perhaps a friendship changes. A workplace that once felt meaningful begins to feel airless. The path you trusted begins to crack beneath your feet. And naturally, the heart asks, why is this happening now? Why does everything feel uncertain at once? But sometimes life is not collapsing. Sometimes it is rearranging. Sometimes what feels like rejection is really a release from what can no longer hold your becoming. A seed does not look powerful when it is buried. It looks hidden. It looks covered over. It looks cut off from the world above it. Yet the burial is not the end of its story. It is the condition that allows the story to continue. In much the same way, there are seasons of human life that feel like burial but are actually transformation. You are no longer who you were, but you are not yet fully who you are becoming. That in-between space is tender. It asks much of you. It asks patience. It asks honesty. It asks the courage to stop calling every uncomfortable season a failure. And let us be clear, quiet does not always feel holy. Sometimes it feels like grief. Sometimes it feels like being overlooked. Sometimes it feels like everyone else has found a map while you are still standing in the fog. But growth is often less glamorous than people imagine. It may look like turning off the noise long enough to admit you are tired. It may look like grieving the version of your life that no longer fits. It may look like sitting with your own soul long enough to discover that much of what once drove you was fear, not love. This kind of truth is not meant to shame you. It is meant to free you. So what do you do in such a season? You do not rush to fill every silence. You do not numb every ache the moment it appears. You do not chase every person who walks away. You sit long enough to learn what the quiet is trying to teach. You ask better questions, not merely, why did they leave? But what in me is being invited to grow stronger? Not merely, why is this door closing? But what life was I trying to force that no longer belongs to me? Not merely, when will this season end? But who am I becoming while I am here? That is where dignity begins to return. Not in grand speeches, not in sudden miracles, in truth, in the simple, unadorned truth that your life is not valuable because it is crowded. Your life is valuable because it is yours. Your soul is not meaningful because everyone understands it. Your soul is meaningful because it was given breath, conscience, memory, tenderness, and the capacity to love. When you begin to live from that deeper place, solitude stops feeling like a verdict and starts becoming a workshop. Something is being shaped there that could not be shaped in public, and when the shaping is real, it changes how you move. You stop begging to be chosen by people who do not know how to hold your spirit with care. You stop mistaking delay for denial. You stop thinking that every loss is proof of divine absence. You begin, slowly, to understand that some doors close because your life is asking more of you than your old identity can provide. Some rooms grow quiet because wisdom is trying to speak in a lower voice. So if this season has felt hushed, strange, and painfully still, do not be too quick to call it empty. There are forms of grace that arrive without spectacle. There are turning points that sound like almost nothing at all. And there are moments when the soul is being prepared, not through noise and reassurance, but through stillness deep enough to reveal what is true. In the next part, we will go further into what it means when life begins to shake, when what once felt solid starts to fall apart, and why disruption itself can become a form of mercy. There are seasons when silence is followed by shaking. You finally begin to sit still, to listen more honestly, to accept that something old is passing, and then suddenly life starts moving under your feet in ways you did not ask for. What once seemed stable becomes uncertain. What once felt settled begins to strain. A plan you trusted loosens in your hands. A relationship changes shape. A path that looked clear last month now feels foreign. And because we are human, we often interpret disruption as disaster. We think, this must be the sign that I missed my way. But continuing the truth carried in the original source, there is another possibility. Perhaps what is trembling is not your destiny, but the structures that can no longer carry it. It takes courage to consider that. Because most people do not fear pain alone. They fear the meaning of pain. They fear what it suggests. If the job ends, does that mean I failed? If the friendship fades, does that mean I was not enough? If the plan breaks, does that mean I misunderstood my whole life? These questions can pierce the heart, but sometimes the better question is gentler and wiser. What if this is not life punishing me, but life repositioning me? What if the break-in is not senseless? What if it is clearing space for a truer arrangement? Many people pray for change, while secretly hoping nothing essential will be disturbed. They want deeper peace, but not the loss of false peace. They want purpose, but not the surrender of old patterns. They want new life, but not the death of the identity that kept them small and familiar. Yet real transformation rarely arrives by politely decorating the room you already live in. More often, it begins by exposing what was unstable from the start. It reveals where you were leaning on appearances, on control, on borrowed definitions of success, on relationships that soothed you but did not strengthen you. This is why upheaval can feel so personal. It does not merely touch your schedule, it touches your story about yourself. Perhaps you thought, I am secure because this role needs me. Then the role changes. Perhaps you thought, I am loved because this person stays. Then the person leaves. Perhaps you thought, I know where I am going because the road is visible. Then the road disappears into weather you cannot read. And there you are, standing in the middle of a life that no longer reflects back the person you thought you were. This moment, painful as it is, can become sacred if you let it. Because disruption does something comfort never can. It reveals your hidden dependencies. It shows you where your faith was really placed. It helps you see whether your confidence was rooted in truth or in circumstances. This is not an accusation. It is an invitation to build more deeply, to live more honestly, to stop calling what is familiar safe when it has quietly become too narrow for your soul. Think of a house being restored after years of neglect. The people passing by may only hear the noise, the tearing down, the dust, the splintering, the inconvenience. It can look ugly before it looks beautiful, but underneath the mess, something necessary is happening. Rot is being removed. Weak beams are being exposed. Foundations are being checked. You would not call that destruction if you understood the purpose. You would call it mercy. You would call it care strong enough to disturb what cannot remain. Human life often works in much the same way. There are times when grace does not appear as comfort. It appears as interruption. A door closes before you can walk through it. An illusion falls apart before you can keep living inside it. A pace you cannot sustain is finally broken. A performance you have been giving for too long becomes too exhausting to continue. In those moments, it is tempting to run backward, to revive old habits, to plead with what is leaving, to force meaning where meaning has already drained away. But growth asks a harder, holier thing. It asks you to stay present long enough to let the old structure fall without rushing to rebuild the same prison in a prettier color. What is life removing from you right now that your deeper self no longer needs? What peace have you made with mediocrity simply because it was predictable? What truth have you delayed because it would require a different life than the one you have been performing? These are not easy questions, but they are liberating ones. Because when disruption is received with honesty, it can become a turning point rather than merely a wound. You begin to see that what felt like rejection may have been redirection, that what looked like a delay may have been protection, that what appeared to be ruin may have been a reset so complete that only later do you understand its kindness. Many people can look back across the years and name a loss they once resisted that eventually saved them from becoming a stranger to themselves. Not every ending is a tragedy. Some endings are releases. Not every shaking is a threat. Some shakings are awakenings. Not every closed door is a punishment. Some closed doors are life refusing to let you abandon your own becoming. And still, let us not romanticize the process. Real disruption can be frightening. Bills remain real. Loneliness remains real. Confusion remains real. Faith does not mean pretending you are not affected. It means allowing yourself to be affected without surrendering your deeper trust. It means saying, I do not yet understand this, but I will not reduce its meaning to fear alone. I will keep listening. I will keep learning. I will not assume that what is being dismantled was meant to last forever. There is a maturity that begins here. You stop asking only for certainty. You begin asking for alignment. You stop demanding that life go according to plan. You begin asking that your life become true. And truth, though slower and less theatrical than fantasy, is far kinder in the end. It can support the weight of a real future. It can hold the life that belongs to you. So when things begin to shift, do not be too quick to curse the movement. Something in you may be being reassembled around a deeper center. Something false may be leaving. Something stronger may be taking root. In the next part, we will move into another layer of this journey, the strange and humbling grace of favor, and how real blessing often arrives in forms the ego would never recognize. Blessing is often misunderstood because people are trained to recognize only the most visible forms of it. They think blessing must look like ease, quick success, public admiration, open doors, immediate answers. They imagine it arriving in clean lines and obvious proof. But the original source points toward a subtler truth. Sometimes what rests upon your life cannot be measured by comfort at all. Sometimes grace appears not as spectacle, but as quiet preservation, strange timing, unseen protection, and the kind of inner steadiness that keeps you standing when circumstances alone should have broken you. There are people who have very little by worldly standards and yet carry a depth, a radiance, a groundedness that cannot be manufactured. There are others who seem to have everything and still move through life hollow, restless, and perpetually afraid. This is why external outcomes alone can never fully explain what it means to be graced. A blessed life is not a life untouched by sorrow. It is a life that keeps finding meaning, direction, mercy, and endurance in the midst of what should have emptied it. Many people have lived through moments they still do not fully understand. They escaped something they did not see coming. They lost what they thought they needed and later realized the loss had spared them. They arrived in rooms they were never sure they belonged in, only to discover they had something real to offer there. They survived seasons that, on paper, should have erased their tenderness, and yet somehow tenderness remained. How do you explain that? Logic can describe the circumstances, but it cannot fully account for the mystery. Sometimes life carries you. Sometimes grace works in ways your mind can only recognize long after your heart has already been held by it. But here is where wisdom is needed. Grace is not the same as vanity. To believe there is something sacred moving in your life is not to imagine yourself superior to others. It is not permission for arrogance. Quite the opposite. Real grace humbles a person. It makes them softer, not louder. It teaches them that much of what sustained them was never earned in the neat, transactional way the ego prefers to imagine. They begin to understand that strength came when they had none left. Openings came when strategy failed. Support arrived in forms they could not have arranged by force. That realization changes how you move through the world. You stop comparing your path so obsessively. You stop apologizing for the light that has survived inside you. You stop trying to explain every good thing as though it must be justified before others can tolerate it. And at the same time, you become less attached to being impressive because you know how fragile appearances can be. One of the deeper signs of grace is not that life always becomes easier. It is that you become more yourself within it, more honest, more grounded, less seduced by what glitters and more committed to what is true. The heart begins to ask different questions. Not, how can I be admired? But, how can I remain aligned with what is real? Not, how do I prove my worth? But, how do I live from the worth I already carry? Not, why was this given to me? But, how shall I steward it with humility and courage? This matters because blessing often arrives wrapped in responsibility. If you are given influence, can you carry it without becoming hard? If you are given opportunity, can you meet it without betraying your soul? If you are given visibility, can you remain faithful to the inner life that shaped you in hidden places? These are not small questions. They determine whether what enters your hands becomes something life-giving or simply something that feeds your old hunger to be seen. And let us be honest. Grace can make people uncomfortable, not because you are doing anything wrong, but because your existence may quietly challenge the story they tell themselves about what is possible. When someone sees a person endure hardship and still remain kind, still remain dignified, still continue rising without becoming cruel, it disturbs certain assumptions. It becomes evidence that suffering does not have to make a person bitter, that wounds do not have to become identity, that a life can be marked by both pain and beauty at once. This is why you must be careful not to shrink yourself in order to make others feel untroubled by your becoming. Humility does not mean dimming, it means shining without contempt. It means carrying what has been entrusted to you without pretending it is small just because someone else is threatened by brightness. There is a way to be luminous without being loud. There is a way to walk in quiet authority without needing to dominate the room. There is a way to accept the goodness moving through your life without turning it into self-worship. Perhaps that is one of the deepest lessons of grace. It is meant to pass through you, not end with you. If you have been kept through difficult years, then perhaps your tenderness is part of the gift. If you have learned truth in the dark, then perhaps your clarity is part of the gift. If you have survived what once seemed unsurvivable, then perhaps your steady presence will become shelter for someone else. Not because you have all the answers, not because you are perfect, but because your life itself has become a kind of witness. It says to others, without spectacle, you can suffer and still remain human. You can lose much and still not lose your soul. You can be overlooked and still not be erased. Have you ever met someone whose very presence made you breathe a little easier? Someone who did not need to perform wisdom because they had lived enough to embody it. Often that is what grace looks like in an ordinary life. It does not always appear as triumph. Sometimes it appears as depth, as patience, as discernment, as the ability to say no to what once dazzled you because you have finally learned the cost of living against your own spirit. And yes, sometimes grace protects by delaying. A door does not open because you are not yet ready for what is on the other side. A longing is not fulfilled on your timeline because the soul must grow strong enough to receive it without being consumed by it. A certain recognition does not arrive until you can carry it without collapsing into performance. This, too, is kindness, even when it hurts. So do not measure the goodness in your life only by speed, scale, or applause. Measure it also by what has been preserved in you, by how many times you could have hardened and did not, by how many illusions have fallen away, by how much truer you have become. Sometimes the greatest blessing is not that you got what you wanted, but that you were slowly made into someone capable of wanting what is real. In the next part, we will move higher into the inner call that begins to unsettle a person from within the sense that you can no longer remain where you have been, and that something in your spirit is asking you to rise, even if the climb costs you comfort. There comes a point in a person's life when have to release what once gave you a sense of belonging. You may have to leave behind roles that kept you acceptable but not alive. You may have to disappoint the version of yourself that wanted life to remain manageable, predictable, admired. You may have to admit that certain dreams were never really yours, only inherited from fear, comparison, or the hunger to be validated. This kind of letting go can feel like grief because, in a real sense, it is grief. You are mourning identities that carried you for a time, even if they can no longer carry you forward. Many people resist this stage because they confuse growth with aggression. They think rising means pushing, proving, conquering. But some of the deepest forms of elevation are quieter than that. They look like deeper integrity, clearer boundaries, a more honest no, a less performative yes. They look like no longer laughing at what wounds your spirit just to stay accepted. They look like no longer betraying your own discernment for the sake of being included. They look like choosing depth over approval, truth over convenience, and long-term wholeness over short-term comfort. What then is higher ground? It is not a place where life becomes effortless. It is not a place where you are above pain. It is not a place where everyone finally understands you. Higher ground is a way of standing. It is a deeper altitude of consciousness where your life is less governed by panic, flattery, fear, and inherited shame. From that place, you begin to see more clearly. You see where you were shrinking. You see where you were over-explaining yourself to people who had no intention of understanding. You see where your compassion had turned into self-abandonment. You see where your longing for love had made you tolerate what wounded your dignity. Clarity of this kind can be painful, but it is also merciful. It allows you to stop living by reflex and begin living by discernment. And discernment changes your appetite. You begin to hunger for what is real, even when it is less exciting. You begin to crave peace that does not depend on denial. You begin to prefer clean sorrow over false joy. You begin to sense that some forms of loneliness are actually signs that you are leaving shallower ground behind. This is why growth can feel isolating before it feels liberating. You may find that certain people no longer know how to meet you. Some will try to pull you back with nostalgia. Others will remind you of who you used to be, as though the past should have permanent authority over your future. Still others will take your evolution personally because your refusal to remain small quietly confronts the bargains they have made with their own unlived lives. You do not need to become cruel in response, but you do need to remain steady. Not every misunderstanding must be corrected. Not every bond must be preserved at the cost of your becoming. Sometimes maturity is simply the ability to bless what cannot follow you and continue climbing anyway. A useful question in this season is not merely, where am I going? But, what am I being asked to outgrow? Outgrowing is not the same as rejecting. It does not mean despising where you have been. It means honoring the role it played while acknowledging that your life now requires a larger honesty. A child outgrows clothing that once fit beautifully. That does not make the old clothing evil. It simply means the body has changed. So it is with the soul. There are beliefs, roles, and environments that once served your development but are no longer spacious enough for the person you are becoming. And yes, the climb can be tiring. There will be days when you question yourself, days when the old life calls to you because it was easier to explain, days when you wonder whether the effort is worth it. In such moments, remember this. Not all exhaustion is a sign that you are on the wrong path. Sometimes it is simply the natural ache of using muscles you have not yet fully grown into. New strength often arrives disguised as awkwardness at first. New altitude can make the air feel thin before your spirit learns to breathe there. Be patient with yourself. Rising is not a performance. It is a process. It does not ask perfection. It asks sincerity. It does not require that you never tremble. It requires that you keep answering the deeper call, even while trembling. If you feel restless now, if familiar places no longer feel like home, if something in you is leaning toward a more honest life, do not dismiss it too quickly. That restlessness may not be dysfunction. It may be summons. It may be the quiet insistence of your own soul refusing to live below its true scale any longer. And in the next part, we will move into one of the hardest realities of growth: why real ascent is often accompanied by resistance, and how the pressure you feel may not be a sign that you should stop, but a sign that something valuable is trying to come forth. One of the hardest truths to accept is that growth does not always feel encouraging while it is happening. Sometimes it feels like resistance from every side. You begin to make more honest choices, to listen more carefully, to rise out of old patterns. And instead of immediate peace, you meet pressure, misunderstanding, fatigue, unexpected conflict, old fears returning with new intensity. The original source names this as a kind of attack before elevation. And even if we understand that in a less dramatic, more human way, the insight remains powerful. When something meaningful is trying to come forth in your life, resistance often increases because the old self does not leave quietly, and neither do the forces, inner or outer, that benefited from your smallness. This can be confusing, especially for sincere people. You may think, if I am moving toward what is true, why does it feel harder instead of easier? Why do I feel more exposed? Why do old wounds seem louder now? But difficulty is not always a sign that you are lost. Sometimes difficulty is what happens when a deeper life begins pressing against the shape of an older one. Sometimes what you call spiritual attack is also grief, nervous system strain, buried fear, and the painful shedding of identities that once kept you safe. The pressure is real, even if its forms are varied. Think of what happens when a seed first breaks open. From the outside, it might look like damage, but the breaking is precisely what allows life to emerge. Or think of a muscle learning new strength. The work is not elegant at first. It trembles. It strains, it resists. Yet that resistance is part of how strength is formed. Human transformation is often similar. When you stop living by old reflexes, when you stop chasing what empties you, when you begin telling the truth to yourself, your whole inner world must reorganize. That reorganization can feel like warfare. And not all resistance comes from within. Sometimes people respond to your becoming with unease. They may not say it plainly. They may call it distance, attitude, change, pride, selfishness. But what they often mean is this: you no longer participate in the version of yourself that made me comfortable. You no longer laugh on cue. You no longer volunteer your spirit for mishandling. You no longer agree to remain legible in the old way. This can stir resentment in those who preferred the more convenient version of you. It is important here not to become self-righteous. Not every disagreement is persecution. Not every disappointment is proof that you are specially chosen for hardship. Wisdom asks you to stay humble, to examine yourself honestly, to ask, is there something I need to repair? Have I become harsh in the name of growth? Have I confused boundaries with contempt? These are necessary questions, but there are also times when the tension is not created by your cruelty, it is created by your clarity. And clarity has a way of disturbing arrangements built on pretense. What should you do in such seasons? First, do not make every feeling into a prophecy. Fear speaks in absolutes. It tells you that because this is hard, it must be wrong. Because you are tired, you must be failing. Because people misunderstand you, you must turn back. But fear is not always a reliable interpreter. Learn to sit with discomfort without immediately obeying it. Learn to breathe before you build conclusions around pain. Second, do not feed resistance with self-betrayal. When pressure rises, many people return to familiar patterns simply because those patterns are known. They go back to the relationship that diminishes them, the work that deadens them, the habits that numb them, the performance that wins approval while costing peace. But going backward is not always safety. Sometimes it is only the avoidance of necessary courage. Third, keep your heart soft without making it defenseless. This is difficult work. A person under pressure may become brittle. They may start swinging at everyone, mistrusting everything, hardening in the name of survival. But one of the deepest tests of maturity is whether you can remain open without becoming naive and protected without becoming cold. There's great dignity in learning how to guard your peace without abandoning your tenderness. Have you noticed how some people survive pain by turning it into identity? They become the rejected one, the betrayed one, the overlooked one, the fighter, the misunderstood soul. The label gives shape to the suffering, but it can also become a prison. Growth invites something braver. It asks you to let pain instruct you without letting it define you completely. Yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were opposed. Yes, some part of this season has been unfair, but you are still larger than what happened to you. This is where endurance becomes sacred. Not the endurance that glorifies suffering for its own sake, but the endurance that keeps your spirit intact while life is refining it. The kind that says, I may cry, but I will not collapse into despair as my only language. I may be wounded, but I will not turn every wound into a weapon. I may be under pressure, but I will not forget who I am trying to become. And slowly, often more slowly than we wish, something changes. The very pressures that once felt like they might destroy you begin to reveal what they have been building. Your discernment grows sharper. Your compassion becomes less performative and more real. Your boundaries stop feeling like guilt and start feeling like wisdom. Your voice becomes quieter but more grounded. You no longer need to announce your strength, because you have had to rely on it in rooms where no one was cheering. That is one of the hidden gifts of resistance. It clarifies your allegiance. It teaches you whether you are committed only to ease or committed to truth. It teaches you whether your peace depends on everyone agreeing with you or whether it can survive in deeper soil. It teaches you that a meaningful life is not built by avoiding every storm, but by becoming the kind of person who can walk through one without abandoning your soul. In the next part, we will begin gathering these threads together: silence, disruption, grace, code, rising, resistance, and look at what it means to live with a steadier trust, to stop asking life to confirm you every moment, and to begin walking with a deeper inner authority shaped by all you have survived. After enough silence, enough shaking, enough hidden grace, enough climbing, and enough resistance, a person begins to change in a way that is difficult to explain from the outside. The change is not always dramatic. It may not look impressive. It may not even be visible to those who only know how to measure life by appearances. But inwardly, something has settled. Something has deepened. You begin to understand, as the original source keeps returning to again and again, that your life cannot be built on applause, panic, or constant external confirmation. It must be built on something quieter, steadier, and more enduring than that. This is where inner authority begins. Not domination, not ego, not the brittle kind of certainty that refuses to learn. True inner authority is gentler than that. It is the calm that comes when you have suffered enough to stop worshiping appearances. It is the steadiness that grows when you have been stripped of borrowed identities and have survived the loss of what once defined you. It is the dignity of a person who no longer needs to be constantly reassured in order to remain true to what they know in their bones. Many people spend years waiting for life to tell them who they are. They look for the answer in success, in relationships, in being wanted, in being visible, in being approved of by the right people. And while all of those things may have their place, none of them can safely carry the whole weight of identity. They are too changeable, too fragile, too dependent on moods, trends, timing, and the limitations of other human beings. If you build yourself entirely on them, then every shift in circumstance will feel like the end of you. But if silence has taught you anything, it is that you remain even when the room goes quiet. If disruption has taught you anything, it is that you can survive the breaking of false structures. If grace has taught you anything, it is that your life is held by more than your own control. If the climb has taught you anything, it is that clarity costs something, but it is worth the cost. If resistance has taught you anything, it is that pressure can reveal your depth rather than erase it. This is how trust becomes different from fantasy. In the beginning, many people think trust means believing that everything will go the way they hope. But mature trust is not so fragile. It says something deeper. Even if I do not understand this season yet, I will not hand myself over to despair. Even if the path is hidden, I will keep walking with honesty. Even if I am misunderstood, I will not return to a smaller life just to be more easily accepted. That is no small thing. That is spiritual adulthood. And spiritual adulthood often looks very ordinary. It looks like not explaining yourself to the wrong room. It looks like declining what flatters you but costs you peace. It looks like recognizing when exhaustion is asking for rest, not self-contempt. It looks like speaking with care instead of reacting from injury. It looks like telling the truth in smaller, steadier ways rather than waiting for one grand act of courage to define you. This kind of maturity is not flashy, but it is life-changing. Because once you begin living from that deeper center, other things fall into place differently. You stop chasing every invitation. You stop interpreting every delay as rejection. You stop assuming that because something is difficult, it must be misaligned. You become more discerning about what deserves your energy. You begin to notice the difference between being chosen and merely being used, between being seen and being consumed, between being needed and being loved. Those distinctions protect the soul. There's also a tenderness that begins to return here. Not naivete, not passivity, tenderness, the kind that can look at your own past without contempt, the kind that can admit, I did what I knew how to do then. I reached for what I thought would save me. I settled in certain places because I was tired, afraid, unhealed, or simply human. This is important because harshness toward yourself will not create wisdom. It will only deepen shame. Honest compassion, however, makes growth sustainable. It gives you room to become without hating who you have been. Perhaps that is one of the quiet miracles of all this. You start to become a safer place for your own soul. You no longer abandon yourself so quickly. You no longer mock your own sensitivity. You no longer treat your pain as evidence of weakness. You begin to sit beside your own life with more patience, more truth, more steadiness. And from that place, your relationship to the future changes. You still hope, you still long, you still reach, but there is less desperation in it, less clutching, less bargaining. You are no longer trying to force life to reassure you every moment. You are learning how to participate with courage while leaving room for mystery. You make your effort, but you stop confusing effort with omnipotence. You show up, but you do not imagine that every outcome rests solely on your ability to manage every variable. There is freedom in that. Great freedom. What would change if you stopped treating every uncertain season as proof that you are failing? What would soften in you if you believe that your worth remains intact even while your life is still becoming? What would become possible if you trusted that some of what is delayed is simply still being prepared in you? These questions matter because they move you out of fear and into reverence. They teach you to live with your life instead of constantly fighting it, not by becoming passive, but by becoming present. There is wisdom in showing up fully without demanding that every chapter immediately explain itself. And when you live this way, people may still misunderstand you. Some will call your calm detachment. Some will call your boundaries distance. Some will call your depth intensity. Let them misunderstand if they must. Not every season of your life is meant to be translated for public comfort. Sometimes your task is simply to remain aligned with what is true and let time reveal the rest. You are not who you were when this journey began. The one who entered the silence frightened and reaching is not the same as the one who now stands in a steadier light. You have been thinned in some places, strengthened in others, emptied of certain illusions, and filled with a quieter wisdom. In the final part, we will bring all of this home and speak plainly about what it means to walk forward now, not as someone who has escaped pain, but as someone who has been shaped by it into deeper dignity, clearer purpose, and a more faithful life. And so you arrive here, not at the end of struggle, but at a truer beginning, after the silence, after the shaking, after the strange mercy of being pulled apart from what no longer fit, after the hidden grace, the climbing, the pressure, and the refining, you begin to understand something the soul rarely learns in comfort. Your life was never meant to be built on constant reassurance. It was meant to be rooted in truth. This final reflection, still shaped by the original source listed in the description, brings us back to the simplest and deepest lesson of all. What is being formed in you matters more than what is being displayed around you. There is a dignity that only hardship can uncover, not because pain is good in itself, and not because suffering should be glorified, but because honest suffering removes certain illusions. It teaches you what cannot hold you. It teaches you what cannot save you. It teaches you how quickly applause fades, how unstable appearances are, how fragile borrowed identities can be. And if you remain open, if you do not let hardship make you bitter beyond recognition, it also teaches you what is real. It teaches you the value of an anchored spirit, the value of clear seeing, the value of tenderness, that survives what tried to harden it. By now, perhaps you can look back and recognize that not everything that left was loss. Some things departed because they were assignments, not homes. Some people could only walk with you as far as a certain version of you existed. Some dreams had to fall apart because they were built from longing, but not from truth. Some delays protected your life from arriving too early to what your spirit was not yet strong enough to carry. This does not erase the ache, but it gives the ache a different meaning. It allows grief to become wisdom instead of only injury. And wisdom changes the way you walk. You stop asking, "Why am I being hidden?" and begin asking, "What is being grown in me here?" You stop asking, "Why is everything being disrupted?" and begin asking, "What false thing is being cleared away?" You stop asking, "Why has the road become so steep?" and begin asking, "What strength is this climb creating in me?" You stop asking, "Why am I under so much pressure?" and begin asking, "What deeper life is trying to come forth?" These are not easy questions, but they are liberating ones because they return you to participation. They remind you that you are not only being acted upon, you are being invited into a deeper relationship with your own becoming. That becoming will not make you perfect. It will make you more honest, and honesty is holier than performance. You may still have trembling days. You may still have lonely evenings. You may still wake some mornings unsure of the next step. But uncertainty is not the same as emptiness. Trembling is not the same as weakness. Loneliness is not the same as abandonment. Sometimes the soul learns slowly. Sometimes it takes time for the heart to trust what the spirit already knows. That is all right. There is no shame in a gradual healing. There is no failure in a slow becoming. Some of the strongest lives are not built in grand moments of certainty, but in quiet, repeated acts of faithfulness. So walk forward gently now. Walk forward without needing to force your timing. Walk forward without shrinking back into old rooms just because they are familiar. Walk forward without confusing visibility with value. Walk forward remembering that peace is not found by controlling every outcome, but by staying aligned with what is true while life unfolds. If you have been silenced, let that silence become listening. If you have been shaken, let that shaking become discernment. If you have been delayed, let that delay become preparation. If you have been wounded, let the wound become a place where compassion deepens rather than disappears. If you have been called higher, do not despise the climb, because the truth is, you are not merely trying to survive this chapter. You are being asked to inhabit your life more fully, to stop abandoning yourself for approval, to stop bargaining away your peace for belonging, to stop living beneath the scale of your own soul. That is sacred work. It may be quiet work, it may be misunderstood work, but it is sacred all the same. And perhaps that is the clearest sign of real transformation. You no longer need to announce it to know it is happening. You feel it in the way you recover, in the way you pause before reacting, in the way you leave what diminishes you sooner than before, in the way you tell the truth with less violence and more steadiness, in the way you grieve without making grief your whole identity, in the way you remain open to wonder without surrendering your discernment. This is how a soul ripens. This is how a person becomes trustworthy to themselves. So let this be the hand on your shoulder today. You are not behind because your growth has been quiet. You are not forgotten because your path has been hidden. You are not failing because the old life is no longer working. You may be standing at the very threshold of a more faithful life, one built not on fantasy, but on courage, tenderness, truth, and the patient strength to keep becoming. Carry that with you. Carry the lesson of the silence. Carry the mercy hidden in disruption. Carry the grace that held you when you could not hold yourself. Carry the call upward. Carry the endurance shaped by resistance. Carry the steadiness that comes from having survived what once seemed larger than you. And as you go, let your life speak softly. Let it say to those who are weary, to those who feel hidden, to those who are standing in the ache of becoming what perhaps you most needed to hear yourself. This season is not meaningless. This pain is not the whole story. This breaking is not the end of your dignity. Something truer can be born here. Something wiser can rise here. Something in you can become more whole, more grounded, more free. The original source is listed in the description. Let it remind you, as you keep walking, that what is being formed in secret often carries the deepest power when it finally reaches the light.